It was a quiet morning in a small town tucked between rolling hills and long, winding roads. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm orange glow across the sky. Birds chirped softly, and the sound of distant cars hummed like background music. The man sat on his front porch, sipping a cup of black coffee from a chipped mug. Beside him lay his dog, a large black German shepherd, resting his head on the wooden boards of the porch. That dog was more than just a pet. He was a friend, a companion, and in many ways a lifeline. The man had adopted him from a training program a few years back. The dog was well-trained, calm, and always alert. Together they shared a quiet life, early walks, peaceful evenings, and long drives with the windows down. The man lived alone in a modest one-story house at the edge of town. His life was simple, almost routine. He wasn't one for parties or loud crowds. Most of his neighbors knew him only as the quiet guy with the big dog. He didn't talk much, but he always waved politely, held doors open for others, and never caused trouble. No one in that neighborhood really knew who he was before he moved there. They didn't know that he had once been part of one of the most elite special forces units in the world, the Delta Force. They didn't know about the missions, the sleepless nights, or the sacrifices. And the man preferred it that way. He wasn't proud or boastful, he just wanted peace. He had seen enough chaos in his life to last a lifetime. After years of serving his country in dangerous places, he had finally decided to step away from it all. He traded the noise of helicopters and gunfire for the quiet hum of crickets and the soft bark of his dog. But even though he had left that life behind, traces of it still lived within him. He woke up early every morning out of habit. He kept his home spotless and organized. His eyes were always alert, scanning his surroundings without even realizing it. And though he smiled easily, there was a weight behind his gaze, the kind that comes from carrying too many memories that can't be shared. The dog seemed to understand him in ways no one else could. When nightmares woke him up in the middle of the night, the dog would place his head on the man's chest, grounding him. When he sat quietly, lost in thought, the dog would nudge his hand, reminding him that he wasn't alone. It wasn't just companionship, it was healing. That morning, as he finished his coffee, he looked at his dog and smiled. "Ready for our walk, buddy?" he said softly. The dog perked up immediately, tail wagging, eyes full of excitement. It was their routine, a morning walk through the nearby park, then a stop at the little cafe where the man would grab another cup of coffee and a small treat for his furry friend. They headed out, the cool air brushing against their faces. The park was nearly empty except for a few joggers and an older couple walking hand in hand. The man liked it that way, quiet, simple, ordinary. He let the dog off the leash for a bit, letting him run and sniff around. The dog never strayed far. He always looked back to make sure his owner was close. When people saw them, they usually smiled. The dog looked intimidating but gentle, and the man carried himself with calm confidence. A few neighbors would wave and he would nod in return. To anyone watching, it was a peaceful scene, just a man and his dog enjoying the morning. The man didn't know that his quiet world was about to change. In another part of town, a call had come into the local police department. Someone had reported a suspicious man walking with a large dog near the park. The caller described him vaguely. A tall black man, wearing a hoodie with a big black dog. The dispatcher, following routine, passed the information to the nearest patrol unit. The man, of course, had no idea. He was just enjoying his morning. He stopped by a bench, sat down, and took a moment to watch the sunrise. His dog sat beside him, panting lightly, eyes bright. It was a moment of peace, the kind he cherished most. Back at the patrol car, two officers discussed the call. It didn't sound serious, but they decided to check it out. "Probably nothing," one of them said. But the other officer, newer to the force, felt uneasy. "Let's just make sure," he replied. They turned on their dash camera and headed toward the park. Meanwhile, the man stood up and started walking back toward the main path. His dog trotted beside him, leash in hand. They were only a few minutes away from home. The streets were still quiet, the world still calm. He didn't hear the police car approach right away. When it did, he turned, a bit surprised to see the flashing lights. The car stopped a few feet away and two officers stepped out. The man froze, unsure what was happening. He had been in enough situations in life to know that sudden moves could cause misunderstandings. So he stayed still, calm, and waited for the officers to speak first. The dog, sensing tension, stood slightly ahead, ears perked. He wasn't growling or barking, just alert, watching the strangers who had approached his owner. One of the officers called out, "Sir, can we speak with you for a moment?" The man nodded. "Sure, what's going on?" His voice was calm, respectful. "Got a call about someone matching your description walking around with a large dog," the officer said. "We just want to make sure everything's all right." The man tilted his head slightly. "Everything's fine. Just out for a walk. We do this every morning." It could have ended there. A simple misunderstanding cleared up in minutes. But tension has a way of growing where it doesn't belong. The second officer, who had been standing slightly behind, noticed the dog shifting its stance.
"Can you keep your dog back?"
he said sharply. "He's fine," the man replied, keeping his tone even. "He's trained. He won't hurt anyone." But the officer didn't seem convinced. "Sir, leash your dog," he ordered, hand hovering near his holster. The man frowned. "He is on a leash," he said, holding it up. The dog, sensing his owner's unease, let out a soft bark. Not aggressive, just alert. But that sound was enough to make things tense. The first officer took a step forward. The dog moved closer to his owner, protective but calm. The man held out his hand. "It's okay," he said softly to his dog. "Stay." The officers hesitated, unsure what to do next. From their point of view, they were just responding to a call. From the man's point of view, two armed strangers were suddenly treating him like a threat for walking his dog. Inside, he felt a familiar feeling, the kind of alertness that used to flood his senses during missions. His breathing slowed, his mind sharpened, but he didn't show it. He knew how to stay calm under pressure. Years of training had taught him that. What he didn't know was that this brief encounter would change everything that followed. After a few tense seconds, the first officer seemed to relax slightly. "All right," he said, "no problem here. You two have a good day." The man nodded. "You too." He turned and began walking away, heart still steady but mind racing. He didn't like the feeling that came with that encounter. The suspicion, the way their hands had hovered near their weapons, the unease in the air. It wasn't anger he felt, but something deeper, a kind of sadness. Back home, he filled his dog's bowl and poured himself another cup of coffee. The dog sat beside him, still alert from the strange meeting. The man sighed and patted his head. "You did good," he said softly. "You always do." That day, he tried to move on as usual. He did some yard work, watched a bit of TV, and later took another short walk with his dog. But the thought of the morning's encounter lingered in his mind. He didn't tell anyone about it. He didn't post online or call the police department. He just let it be, or tried to. He had faced much worse in life, but there was something about that moment that unsettled him more than he expected. Maybe it was because it happened right here, in the place he thought he could finally call home. That night, he sat on the porch again, watching the stars. The dog lay at his feet, calm as ever. The crickets sang their familiar tune and the air was cool. For a moment, everything seemed fine again. He didn't know that this was only the beginning, that in the days to come, a simple misunderstanding would grow into something much bigger, something that would shake his quiet life to its core. But for now, all was still. Just a man, his loyal companion, and the peace of another quiet night in a town that still didn't know who he truly was. The next few days went by quietly. The man stuck to his usual routine, early mornings, long walks, and evenings spent on the porch with his dog. From the outside, everything seemed peaceful again, but deep inside, he couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that had crept in after that encounter at the park. He didn't want to admit it, but something about the way those officers looked at him had stirred memories he had tried to bury. It wasn't just the suspicion in their eyes. It was the fear, the kind that comes from not being seen for who you truly are, but rather what someone assumes you might be. He had faced real danger before, and enemies with weapons, missions that tested his limits, but that morning had felt different. It wasn't life or death in the traditional sense. It was something smaller but sharper, like a quiet reminder that no matter how much he tried to live a simple life, the world could still misread him in an instant. He didn't talk about it with anyone. He didn't have family nearby, and he wasn't the type to unload his thoughts online. The only one who heard his voice most days was the dog. They shared an understanding silence. one that didn't need words to feel full. Every morning, when the man tied his shoelaces and reached for the leash, the dog wagged his tail eagerly, ready for another walk. It was their thing, a rhythm, a bond, a moment of peace before the rest of the world woke up. But on that one particular morning, the air felt different. The clouds hung low and a faint drizzle fell across the town. The man almost decided to skip the walk. Yet, as always, the sight of his dog waiting by the door changed his mind. "All right," he said softly, pulling on his jacket. "Let's go." They walked the familiar path, through the park, past the old wooden bench, across the bridge where the creek flowed quietly below. The drizzle had turned into a mist that hung in the air, cool and soft. The dog trotted happily, tail wagging, nose low to the ground as he explored every scent. They were about halfway through when a car passed slowly on the nearby road. The man barely noticed it at first, but the car slowed down, and the sound of tires crunching against gravel made him glance up. It was a police car. For a brief second, his chest tightened. The memory of the last encounter flashed through his mind. He told himself it was just a coincidence. He was doing nothing wrong. He had every right to be there. Still, his steps slowed. The car pulled over to the side and 2 officers stepped out. The man recognized one of them, the same officer from before, the younger one who had seemed more tense. "Morning, sir," the officer called out, voice calm but professional. "Morning," the man replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Out for a walk again?" "Yes, like every morning," he said. There was a short silence. The dog stood beside him, quiet but alert. "We've had a few calls lately," the officer continued. "Some people reported feeling uneasy about a large dog being off-leash in the park." The man frowned slightly. "He's always on a leash," he said, lifting the strap in his hand again. "I understand, sir," the officer said. "But some folks said they saw the dog running around freely." The man sighed quietly. "Sometimes I let him run a few feet ahead, but he's trained. He never bothers anyone." "I believe you," the officer said quickly, maybe realizing his words were rubbing the man the wrong way. "It's just that we have to respond when people call. You understand?" "I do," the man said. "But I also hope people understand that not every dog, or person, they don't recognize is a threat." The officer nodded, not sure how to respond. The second officer stayed near the car, watching silently. After a few awkward seconds, the man decided to end the conversation. "We'll head home," he said. "All right, sir," the officer replied. "Have a good day." The man walked away, his dog trotting quietly beside him. But inside something had shifted. It wasn't anger, and it was disappointment. He had lived his life by discipline, respect, and service. And yet here he was, a man who had risked his life for his country, being treated like a question mark in his own neighborhood. That evening, he sat on his porch again. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. His dog rested beside him, eyes half closed. The air smelled of rain and earth. He thought about calling the local police department, maybe to talk, to explain, to clear things up. But then he stopped himself. He didn't want to be seen as someone making a fuss. He just wanted to live quietly. The days passed. The weather warmed. The trees along the street began to turn a deep shade of green. But that uneasy feeling never fully left. He started to notice little things. The way some neighbors looked a little longer than usual, or how a few people crossed to the other side of the street when he and his dog approached. It hurt, though he tried not to show it. He had fought in places where differences didn't matter, where trust was built on survival and courage, not skin or appearances. To come home and feel like a stranger in his own country, that was a wound that didn't bleed, but it ached all the same. Still, the man carried on. Because that's what he had always done. Carry on, keep steady, stay focused. Then came the day that changed everything. It was late afternoon. The man had just finished some light repairs around the house. He decided to take his dog for a short walk before dinner. The air was cool and the park was nearly empty. The sound of the creek nearby was soft and steady. As they reached the far end of the park, a group of kids were playing with a ball. The ball rolled toward the dog, who happily picked it up and wagged his tail. The kids laughed, and one of them ran over to take it back. The dog dropped it gently, tail wagging, friendly as ever. The kids giggled and waved. The man smiled. It was one of those small moments that made him feel normal, part of a world that didn't judge him. He waved back at the children and started heading home. A few minutes later, as he walked down the street leading back to his house, another police car pulled up behind him. This time the lights were on. He turned, surprised. The officer inside rolled down the window. "Sir, can you stop for a second?" The man sighed quietly but complied. "Is there a problem?" he asked. "Got a call about a large dog chasing kids near the park," the officer said. The man blinked in disbelief. "Chasing kids? That's not true. He picked up their ball." They were laughing. The officer looked uncertain. "That's just what the report said. We have to follow up." "Of course," the man said calmly. "You're doing your job." But you can see he's calm. "You can even ask the kids and they're still there." The officer nodded but didn't move. He radioed something quietly, his hand resting on the door. The man stood still, one hand on the leash, the other hanging loosely by his side. His dog stood beside him, ears perked but calm. Then, from the other side of the street, another patrol car arrived. 2 more officers stepped out. The man's heart sank a little. He didn't understand why there were now 4 officers for something so simple. One of the new officers walked closer. "Sir, can you please move your dog back?" "He's already beside me," the man said, voice still even. "He's not aggressive." "Just a precaution," the officer replied. The dog looked up at the man as if waiting for a cue. The man gave a small nod. "Stay," he said softly. He could feel the tension in the air thickening, though no one had done anything wrong. And then, as often happens in life, everything changed in a moment that no one could take back. A loud sound, a door slamming from somewhere nearby, startled the dog. It wasn't much, just a quick reaction. The dog barked once, a sharp, startled bark, and took a small step forward. It wasn't aggression. It was instinct, but the officers, already tense, reacted fast. One of them reached for something, a gesture meant to control the situation. The man immediately stepped forward, holding up his hand. "It's okay," he said quickly. "He's not attacking, he's startled." The dog stopped barking, sensing his owner's calm voice. But the situation was already spinning faster than anyone could manage. The officers were shouting overlapping commands. "Step back! Leash your dog! Don't move." The man tried to stay calm, his voice firm but low. "He's under control. Please lower your voices when he can feel the tension." But fear moves faster than reason. Within seconds, the sound that followed would become one he could never forget. He stood frozen, the world spinning around him. The air was filled with echoes, voices, confusion, disbelief. Time seemed to slow. The dog lay still on the ground. The man didn't move. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He just stood there staring, every muscle in his body locked. The officers spoke to him, their words a blur. But he didn't hear them. The only sound that mattered was gone. The silence that followed was louder than any noise he had ever known. He knelt slowly, his hand trembling as he reached for his dog. The leash hung loosely, swaying in the wind. For the first time in years, the man felt something break inside him, something that even war hadn't been able to touch. He looked up at the officers, his face calm, but his eyes hollow. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't say a word, he just whispered to himself, almost inaudibly, "You didn't have to do that." And with that, his quiet world, the peaceful life he had built, step by step, shattered completely. The evening after the shooting was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. The street that had always been silent now carried a strange weight in the air. A few neighbors stood outside their homes, whispering softly to each other. Police tape fluttered gently in the wind. The man sat on the edge of the curb, still, expression unreadable. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just sat there, one hand resting on his knee, staring at the empty leash that lay across his lap. The world around him moved like a distant hum. Flashing lights, murmuring officers, camera shutters clicking somewhere in the distance. But he felt none of it. Inside, he was completely still. An officer approached him, speaking in a soft, careful voice. "Sir, we're very sorry for what happened." "It was an accident," the man didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. "Sir, we'll need to ask you a few questions." He looked up finally, and for a second the officer hesitated. There was something in his eyes, not rage, not even grief, but a kind of focus that made the air shift. Calm, controlled, heavy. I'll answer your questions, the man said quietly. The officers led him to the patrol car, not in handcuffs, but out of formality. They needed to document everything. The call, the response, the sequence of events. The man went along without argument. He didn't raise his voice, didn't protest. He just followed instructions, answering each question with a steady, even tone. Yes, he was leashed. Yes, he barked once. No, he didn't attack. Yes, I told him to stay. When it was over, one of the senior officers said softly, "You're free to go, sir." "We'll file the report," the man nodded. "Am I allowed to take him?" The officer shook his head, eyes lowering. "I'm sorry. He'll be taken to animal control for documentation." The man stood there, the leash still in his hand, feeling the faint imprint of the dog's pull that would never come again. He walked home slowly. Every step felt heavy, like his boots were filled with sand. When he opened the door, the house felt emptier than it had ever been. The silence was unbearable. For years he had been used to quiet, but not this kind of quiet. Not the kind that echoes. He placed the leash on the table and sat down on the couch. For a long time he didn't move. It wasn't until much later, when the sky outside turned completely dark, that he spoke for the first time since it happened. His voice cracked slightly as he whispered, "You were a good boy." He stayed like that until morning. The next day his story was already spreading. Someone had recorded part of the incident on their phone. The video showed him standing calmly, his dog beside him, then a sudden noise, and then silence. The clip didn't show everything, but it showed enough to raise questions. By noon, the local news had picked it up. "Man's dog shot by police during routine check." The headline was simple, but the story beneath it wasn't. People in town began to talk. Some said the police had overreacted. Others said they were just doing their job. But no one could deny that something about the video felt wrong. The calmness of the man, the confusion afterward, the stillness that followed. The man didn't watch the news. He didn't need to. Strangers began leaving small notes and flowers outside his fence. "Sorry for your loss. Justice for your dog." He didn't ask for any of it. He just wanted quiet, the kind of quiet that no longer existed. 2 days later, a man in a suit showed up at his door. "I'm with the department's internal review board," he said politely. "We'd like to speak with you about what happened." The man invited him in. The conversation was calm, measured, professional. He answered every question honestly, clearly. The investigator took notes, nodding occasionally. When it was over, the man asked one question of his own. "Will the officer be held accountable?" The investigator hesitated. "It depends on the findings. There will be a review process," the man nodded once. "I see." That night he sat at his kitchen table with a notebook in front of him. He began writing, not about revenge or anger, but about the details. Every second of what happened. Every command spoken. Every movement. His training had taught him to remember. Details mattered, and now for the first time that skill had a different purpose. He wrote for hours, methodically, like a soldier preparing a report. But this wasn't for the military. This was for something else, something personal. The next morning he received a call. A local reporter wanted to interview him. At first he refused. He didn't like attention, but after a long silence he changed his mind. "Fine," he said. "I'll speak. But I'll speak once. And I'll speak the truth." The interview was simple. The reporter sat across from him in his living room, microphone placed on the table between them. The man spoke calmly, clearly, with no dramatic pauses or emotional outbursts. "I served this country for more than a decade," he said. "I've been in places most people only see in movies. I've faced things that would break most men. But nothing prepared me for watching my best friend die in front of me, in a place that was supposed to be safe." The reporter asked gently, "What do you want to happen now?" He looked down at his hands, the faint scars that told stories of years in service. Then he said, "I want people to remember that peace isn't just the absence of war. It's how we treat each other when we're not fighting." The interview aired that night. Within hours, it spread online. People across the country began to share his story. Not just because of what happened, but because of how he carried himself. Calm, dignified, heartbroken, but not hateful. Messages began to pour in, and from veterans, from dog owners, from people who had felt misunderstood. "Stay strong. We stand with you. Your story matters." The police department issued a short statement saying they were investigating the incident. but the public pressure was growing. Local leaders called for transparency. National outlets began picking up the story. Still, the man stayed quiet. He didn't go to rallies or make speeches. He didn't post online. He simply lived his life, quieter now but not broken. Every morning he still woke up early. He still made his coffee. Sometimes, out of habit, he would pour a second bowl of food, then catch himself and stop. The silence in those moments was heavier than anything he'd known in combat. One evening, a neighbor knocked on his door. It was the older gentleman who lived 2 houses down. "I saw the news," the man said softly. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." The veteran nodded. "Thank you. If you ever need anything at all, just knock," the neighbor said before walking away. That small act of kindness reminded him that not everyone turned away. There were still good people who cared, people who understood without needing to ask questions. A few days later, he received another visit, this time from a lawyer. "I'm representing a few community members who want to file a civil complaint," she said. "You don't have to join, but your testimony could help." He thought about it for a long time. He didn't care about money or lawsuits, but he cared about truth, about making sure no one else went through what he did. "I'll do it," he said finally. From that day, his quiet life became a little busier. Meetings, interviews, statements. People wanted his opinion, his story, his face. But through it all, he stayed steady. The same calm tone, the same measured words. Everywhere he went, people treated him with respect. Yet inside, he still felt that empty space beside him. The space where his dog would have been. Sometimes at night, he would sit on the porch and look out at the stars. He would imagine the soft sound of paws against the wood, the steady rhythm of breathing beside him. He'd close his eyes and whisper, "We're not done yet, buddy. We're just getting started." Because in his mind, this wasn't about one mistake or one officer. It was about something bigger, about accountability, understanding, and the quiet dignity that comes from standing your ground without raising your voice. Weeks passed. The investigation continued. Public pressure grew. News stations camped outside his street. But the man stayed composed. He refused to let anger define his story. One night, he opened his old storage box, the one filled with his service medals and photos from his time in uniform. He hadn't looked at them in years. He picked up one medal, traced his thumb across the surface, and sighed. "All those years," he murmured. "All that training. I thought it was just for the battlefield. I didn't realize I'd need it for home." He put the medal down, stood up, and walked to his desk. There, he began to write again. Not a report this time, but a letter. A message to anyone who would listen. "I'm not here to fight," he wrote. "I've fought enough. I'm here to remind people that justice isn't born from anger, but from courage. The courage to stay calm, to stand firm, and to speak the truth, even when your heart is broken." When he finished, he signed it simply, not with his name, but with the initials of his dog's name. A quiet tribute to the friend who had given him purpose again. By the time the investigation's final report came out weeks later, the story had reached every corner of the country. The officers involved were placed on leave. The department announced new training programs for handling service animals and improving de-escalation tactics. But more importantly, something had shifted in people's hearts. The man's story had become a reminder of patience, strength, and compassion. And though he still carried the weight of loss, he also carried something new. A purpose. A reason to keep walking forward even when the path was empty beside him, because for him the mission was no longer about war. It was about peace, real peace, and making sure no one else lost it the way he did. The days turned into weeks, and the story of the man and his dog spread far beyond the small town. What had started as a local tragedy had now become a national conversation. News channels discussed it, podcasts mentioned it, and thousands of people online shared his calm words from that one interview. The line where he said, "Peace is how we treat each other when we're not fighting." That sentence seemed to touch something deep in people. It wasn't angry or political. It was simply human. People could feel that his pain was real, and his calm made it even more powerful. Reporters began to call every day. Some wanted new interviews. Others wanted to use his story for documentaries or articles. But the man stayed quiet. He didn't want fame. He didn't want attention. He just wanted truth and understanding. He went on with his days quietly. He still woke early, though mornings now felt lonelier. Sometimes, he would find himself standing at the door with the leash in his hand before realizing there was no one waiting for him on the other side. He'd sigh softly, set it down, and start his day anyway. One afternoon, he received a letter in the mail. It was from the Department of Defense. They had seen the news too. The letter thanked him for his service and acknowledged the example of dignity and calm he had shown during such a difficult time. It was polite and formal, but reading it brought back a wave of memories. The sound of rotors above, the weight of a rucksack, the bond of brothers in arms who always had each other's backs. For a moment, he closed his eyes and could almost smell the dust of the places he had once fought in. Back then, everything was about trust, knowing that the person beside you would do everything to protect you. That bond had meant everything to him. Losing his dog had felt like losing that bond all over again. That evening, he went for a walk. Not through the park this time, but along the quiet road behind his neighborhood. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of pine and rain. As he walked, he thought about everything that had happened. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew one thing for certain. Staying silent would not bring his friend back, and it would not help anyone else. A few days later, he agreed to meet with a group of local veterans who had reached out to him. They gathered at a small community center, sitting in a circle of folding chairs. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. One of the men said, "We've all seen what happened to you. We're proud of how you handled it." The man nodded quietly. "I didn't handle it perfectly," he said. "I just did what I could." Another veteran leaned forward. "You did more than that. You showed the country how to stand your ground without losing your humanity." The man didn't respond right away. He looked down at his hands for a moment, then said, "I just want people to see each other. Really see each other. Not as threats, not as strangers, and just as people." The veterans talked for hours, sharing stories, and some painful, some filled with laughter. It reminded him that connection was still possible, even after everything. Before leaving, one of them said, "You should think about starting something, a program maybe to train officers or talk to young veterans about communication and calm under pressure. You've got the kind of voice people listen to." The man smiled faintly. Maybe someday. But that idea stayed with him. The following week, the results of the official investigation were released to the public. The report confirmed that the officer had acted out of fear, not aggression, and had failed to follow proper de-escalation procedures. It stated clearly that the man had not done anything wrong and that his dog had not been a threat. When the news broke, the community reacted strongly. Some demanded firings and punishments, others called for reforms. The man read the report silently, then set it aside. He didn't smile and he didn't celebrate. For him, there was no victory in it, only relief that the truth was finally written down somewhere official. He stepped outside and sat on his porch. The evening sun painted everything in soft orange light. For the first time in weeks, he felt a small sense of peace return. Not complete, but enough to take a deep breath without pain in his chest. The next morning, a knock came at his door. It was the young officer from that day, the one who had first spoken to him at the park weeks earlier. He looked nervous, standing there in his uniform. "Sir," the officer began, voice low, "I came to apologize for everything." The man studied him quietly for a moment, then said, "You weren't the one who fired." "No," the officer said, "but I was there, and I didn't do enough to stop it." The man looked at him for a long moment. He could see that the officer was sincere, young, shaken, and trying to do the right thing. "Come sit," the man said finally. They sat on the porch together. The air was quiet except for the sound of wind through the trees. The officer spoke softly. "I joined the force to help people, but lately, I feel like we keep hurting more than we help. I don't know how to fix it." The man nodded slowly. "You fix it one person at a time. You learn. You listen. You make sure that next time, fear doesn't make the decision for you." The officer nodded, eyes down. "I'll remember that." When he left, the man felt something shift inside. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding. Sometimes people needed a second chance to do better. That night he opened his notebook again. On the first page he wrote in large letters, Project Shadow. It was the beginning of something new, a program that would combine his military training with lessons in empathy, patience, and understanding. His goal was simple: to help police officers, veterans, and community members learn how to handle tense moments with calm and respect. Over the next few weeks, he began planning. He reached out to a few people, veterans, trainers, counselors, and slowly the project took shape. They held their first workshop in a local gym. Only 8 people showed up, but it was a start. He spoke plainly, without fancy slides or technical terms. He told stories, not of battle, but of communication. He explained how staying calm could save lives, how reading body language mattered more than drawing a weapon, and how fear could be managed with discipline and empathy. The attendees listened closely. Some even took notes. One officer said afterward, "I wish we learned this in the academy." The man smiled. "That's why we're here." Word of the workshop spread. More people began attending: police, teachers, community members, even parents. The local news covered one of the sessions, showing the man standing in front of a small group speaking with quiet authority. He didn't raise his voice once, yet everyone in the room hung on his every word. A few months later, the mayor invited him to speak at a public safety event. The hall was full. Reporters lined the back, cameras rolling. When he stepped up to the microphone, there was complete silence. He looked around the room, took a slow breath, and began. "I'm not here to talk about what was lost," he said. "I'm here to talk about what we can still build. Fear and anger can destroy a moment faster than any weapon. But empathy, real empathy, can rebuild it just as fast. We owe it to each other to be better, to listen better, to see better." He paused, scanning the crowd. "I've seen war. I know what destruction looks like. What happened to me was not war, but it came from the same place: fear. And fear doesn't go away by fighting it. It goes away by understanding it." When he finished, the audience stood and applauded quietly, not out of excitement, but out of respect. After the event, a young woman approached him. "My father's a police officer," she said softly.
He told me your story changed how he thinks about his job.
"I just wanted to thank you." The man smiled gently. "Tell him to keep trying. That's how change begins." That night, as he drove home, he realized something had shifted again. This time, not just inside him, but around him. The world wasn't the same as it had been weeks ago. It was still flawed, still full of misunderstandings, but there was movement, growth, awareness. When he got home, he walked out to the backyard where his dog used to run. The grass had grown taller since he last mowed it. The stars were bright overhead, scattered like small lights of hope. He stood there for a while, looking up. "We're doing all right, buddy," he said softly. "You'd like what we're building." He didn't know what the future would hold. More workshops, maybe a nonprofit, maybe partnerships with local departments. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like his life had direction again. Not the kind of direction that comes from orders or missions, but from purpose. Quiet, grounded purpose. He knew there would still be days when the silence hurt, days when he would reach for a leash that wasn't there, or glance at an empty space by his porch steps. But now there was also something new. People who looked at him not with suspicion, but with respect. He had turned pain into progress, and though the world had taken something from him that could never be replaced, he had given something back. A message, a lesson, a reminder that peace isn't passive. It takes courage, effort, and heart. As he stood in the soft glow of the porch light, a faint breeze brushed past him. It was quiet again, the kind of quiet he could finally live with, because this time it wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Months passed, and the project the man had started grew faster than anyone expected. What began as a few people sitting in a community hall had turned into a program that drew attention from different parts of the country. Police departments began calling, asking if he could visit and speak to their officers. Colleges reached out too, wanting him to talk to students about leadership and calm under pressure. He never asked for fame or recognition. He only wanted to share what he had learned through pain, that understanding could save lives in ways that weapons never could. His small home became busier. Papers filled the kitchen table, plans, invitations, letters from strangers who had seen his story online. Some wrote to say thank you. Some shared their own experiences of being misunderstood or losing trust in people. Others simply wrote that his story had helped them find hope again. He tried to reply to as many as he could. Each time he read one, he was reminded that healing was never a straight line. It moved slowly, sometimes backward, but always forward in its own way. One afternoon, he received a message from a large veteran organization. They wanted to partner with him to take Project Shadow national. They would help fund workshops in multiple states, train facilitators, and expand the message. When he read the proposal, he sat quietly for a long time. Part of him still found it hard to believe that his quiet life had become something that reached people far beyond his small town. He decided to accept. Not because of pride, but because he felt that it was what his dog would have wanted, for something good to come from what happened. Soon, his days were filled with travel. He spoke to rooms full of officers, community workers, students, and veterans. He always began the same way. "I'm not here to talk about rules," he would say. "I'm here to talk about people." He told them about fear, how it clouds judgment, how it grows when we stop seeing each other as human. He talked about patience, how it was not weakness but strength. He shared simple lessons that had once kept him alive. Breathing before reacting, reading body language, choosing calm over control. At first, some people listened with doubt. But when they heard the quiet honesty in his voice, something changed in the room. They realized he wasn't there to shame anyone. He was there to remind them that everyone, no matter their role, carried the same need. To be respected, to be safe, to be seen. After each session, people would come up to shake his hand. Some would even hug him. They told him that his words had made them rethink how they treated others, how they handled pressure, even how they spoke to their own families. He never preached, and he never pointed fingers. He simply told the truth, wrapped in kindness. During one of his trips, he was invited to a memorial event for service animals. Families and officers gathered with pictures of their loyal companions. As he stood on the stage, he looked at the crowd, so many faces filled with love and loss. He spoke softly. "The ones we lose never really leave us. They live on through how we carry their lessons forward. They teach us patience, loyalty, and the power of quiet love. Every time we act with kindness instead of fear, they live again through us." The audience fell silent. Some wiped away tears. When the event ended, a young boy came up to him holding a small framed photo of a dog. "This was my dad's partner," the boy said. "He told me to always be calm like you." The man smiled, kneeling to the boy's level. "Your dad was right. Calm can make the world safer." Moments like that reminded him why he kept going. Back home, the project team expanded. The same veterans who had encouraged him months ago joined in, helping organize training events and workshops. Together, they designed simple programs that focused on empathy and understanding. Lessons anyone could use, not just police or soldiers. Soon, schools began asking for programs too. Teachers said they wanted students to learn emotional control, teamwork, and respect. The man agreed immediately. He believed that change had to start young, before fear and prejudice had time to take root. When he spoke to kids, his tone was warm and easy. He told stories about courage and friendship, not war or violence, but quiet bravery. The kind that happens when someone chooses patience or stands up for someone being treated unfairly. The children listened closely. Some would ask him questions like, "Were you ever scared?" or "How did you stay calm?" He would smile and answer honestly, "Yes, I was scared many times." But calm isn't about never being scared. It's about choosing to think before you act. It's something we can all learn. He began to notice how these moments filled the empty spaces in his heart. The world still carried pain, but he was no longer trapped in it. Every person he reached, every young mind he spoke to felt like a step toward healing. Not only for others, but for himself. One evening, after returning from a long trip, he sat on his porch again. The air was still and warm, the sky painted in soft colors of orange and blue. He watched the sun dip behind the trees. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the heaviness of loss. Instead, he felt gratitude. He thought about everything that had happened, and the silence, the sorrow, the long road that had led him here. It wasn't a path he had chosen, but it had given him something unexpected. Purpose. He picked up his notebook, the same one where he had first written Project Shadow. The pages were now filled with notes, ideas and letters from people he had met along the way. At the very back, there was a short list and reminders to himself. It read, "Stay calm, listen before speaking, forgive. Even when it's hard, keep building." He smiled and closed the book gently. That week, a national news channel invited him to appear on a segment about community healing. He hesitated at first. He didn't like cameras or attention. But then he realized that this was another way to reach people, another way to spread peace. During the interview, the host asked, "After everything you've been through, do you still trust people?" He paused for a moment before answering. "I trust the good in people. It's still there, even when fear tries to hide it. I've seen it, in officers who came to learn, in kids who listened, in strangers who reached out. It's still there. We just have to keep reminding each other." The clip went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. People shared it everywhere, saying his words made them feel hopeful again. Soon after, he received an invitation to speak at a national peace conference. The hall was filled with leaders, teachers, officers, and community members from across the country. When he stepped on stage, there was a quiet hush. He began slowly, his voice steady and gentle. "I once lost something I loved deeply," he said, "and in that loss, I learned something I want to share with you today. Peace isn't just the absence of conflict, it's the presence of understanding. It's what happens when we look at someone and see their story instead of our assumptions." He paused, letting the words settle. "We can't change the past," he continued, "but we can choose how we carry it. We can choose to turn pain into purpose, to replace anger with awareness. That's how healing begins. One moment, one person at a time." The audience stood and applauded, not with loud cheers, but with quiet respect. Many had tears in their eyes. After the conference, people came up to thank him. Some officers, some community leaders, some ordinary citizens. Each one told him how his story had changed the way they saw others. As he left the building, he felt a calm sense of completion. The journey had taken him through pain, loss, silence, and rediscovery. And now, finally, toward peace. Back at home that night, he walked out to the spot in his yard where his dog used to rest. He placed a small stone there carved with one simple word: peace. He sat beside it for a while, listening to the soft sounds of the night. The world was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. Not heavy, not lonely. It was full of memory, purpose, and life. He looked up at the stars and whispered, "We made it, buddy. You're still with me." The breeze moved gently through the grass, almost like an answer. He smiled. For the first time since that day in the park, he felt truly whole again. His journey had taught him that peace wasn't something you waited for. It was something you created, moment by moment, word by word, choice by choice. And that's what he would keep doing. Not as a soldier, not as a victim, but simply as a man who believed that calm could change the world. Because sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that last the longest.